So the got it.
Hello, Marsha. Thank you. We were just talking about Zoom, and I didn't realize that Zoom had updated, and now you have to choose the option of whether or not you're going to record to the cloud. So I did you know that they made this change?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all
I
right.
use it a
I
lot.
didn't even know that that was an option.
Yeah. All good. All
It's
good.
okay. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you, putting a little pin in that while I pressed the record button and figured it out. But we're not going to edit this. This is all real, true. Like, this is exactly what the podcast episode is. I want to thank you for coming on today. And I want to start things off by asking you to tell us a little bit about who you are, what your story is, where you're from. Mic is yours. Stage is yours. Go ahead.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Fallon. I love seeing you in the podcast. As soon as I saw it launch, I was like, finally, yes, use your voice, do it. I love it. I think more and more women, honestly, people in general in podcasting, but I love seeing women jump out and start a podcast. My name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. I am a whole bunch of things, but I like to call myself a storytelling NLP trainer and speaker, podcaster, author, and I help people to learn how to share themselves, more of themselves, vulnerable stories, putting themselves out there, changing the meaning of the story, and really teaching people how to shift from being stuck in a story to standing on a story. So my journey started probably well over a decade ago, but I spent most of my life as a registered kinesiologist. So I worked in post physical rehab. And so I've been coaching for probably 30 years. I never really looked at those years as coaching, but when you're trying to teach somebody to walk again, there's a lot of coaching that's involved. And about probably 10, 12 years ish, we started to experience teen substance abuse. And I found myself in a really small, dark space, trying to figure out how to navigate a difficult time and like save everyone around me and how to make things better, etc. All these things. And I did that. And for a while, I finally found myself in this space feeling like nobody's talking about difficult things. Like, why are we living in this curated, perfect looking world when people are struggling left, right, and center, but nobody's talking about it? I don't understand.
Right.
And I remember a counselor saying to me, I think that's because you're supposed to. And I just thought that was the craziest thing. And at the same time, I was like, what if I am actually? And that's where it really started, is I started from there, and small speaking engagements to a couple of collaborative chapters to writing my own solo book, starting the podcast. And then over the last 3 years, really diving into NLP, neuro linguistic programming, to learn how to heal myself and make that a priority. And it's just been it's been a bit of a wild ride. I can say that.
Yeah, we met in 2020.
2020, right?
And I remember, yeah, it was 2020, and I remember we were talking about. I was at the time I was in like notes and organization because that was a tip from a former coach of mine, and you had reached out. You were like, "Hey, maybe we could do something." You were coaching a group online at the time, and I can tell you from when I met you then to where you are now, it is like you had a quantum leap in
Yeah.
those 3 years. Like, so much has happened. You've grown so much. I have been listening to your podcast. I wouldn't say necessarily religiously, but I remember listening to it then and listening to it now, and it is so drastically different. What do you think happened besides maybe your own subconscious NLP kind of journey, like to get you to that like quantum leap in the last like such a short amount of time?
You know what? I first off, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to receive that, because I think we're so hard on ourselves that we think we're not where we're supposed to be yet, and we are by far our biggest critic, right? Most of us are concerned about what are others going to think or say about us, and really, at the end of the day, it's we are the ones that are being our own critics. So I'm going to stop and receive that, because if I really stop and think about where things were in 2020 to now, it is very different. But the thing is when you're in the quantum leap, it might feel like you're floating around and nothing is landing and nothing is happening. And it's like, where are we going with this? But it does, and I think that's a big lesson, because I was talking about The Gap and the Gain, one of my favorite books. If you stand in the gap, you're
Mhm.
always looking outward at where you're not yet and where everyone else is. But if you stand in the gain, you really should only be comparing yourself to yourself. Like, you really should be comparing yourself to your past version of yourself, and that's it. And so thank you for that. What do I think the big change is? I think I have failed more times in the last 3 years than people will ever know. I'm going to actually say that. No one asked me this question. I think I have stumbled, fallen, failed. And I don't even like the word failure, only because of the connotation people give it. But I'm going to say, I have launched things that haven't worked. I have done partnerships that haven't worked. I have done so many different things that I got to the point where I literally had to strip it all away and say, all right, we're going to start over. What does this look like? What do you want to do? How do you want your business to feel? And at the end of
Mhm.
the day, I love podcasting. There's no question. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do. It doesn't pay me in a monetary way. And most business coaches will tell you to cut that out, right? Stop doing that. And I've been told by many mentors to stop doing it. And I'm like, nope, because I like it and I enjoy it. And I think it's important to check in with yourself. What do you like and what do you enjoy? I have had a lot of different people reach out to coach to we just signed a publishing client. We're now going into publishing with our company, who found me right strictly through the podcast. That was it. So it it's a great way to get your name and things out there. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. Second thing is, I do think that by failing and stripping things away and really going inward and learning and understanding a lot about subconscious reprogramming. Like, when I took my NLP practitioner's course in 2020, I mean, I took it for me. It was the very first thing in my business. I didn't take it for strategy, for, the next big thing for my business. I took it because I realized that there was a lot of parts of my own healing and growth that I had skipped over, because life kind of catapulted me through, I hope I can swear, major shit show.
You can.
through,
Yeah,
through
you
a
could.
major shit show through a number of years. And I just put my head down and pushed through and kept going, which there's nothing wrong with. But eventually, you know what? Life, your body, it catches up and it says, can we just slow that down here and figure things out? So I think for me, when I really started to dive into understanding my brain, how it works, especially in relation to trauma, big T, little T stories, doesn't matter, and understanding I hadn't taken the time to slow down. When I did that, when I slowed down, I was then able to use some of those tools to look at, what are some of the old stories I've told myself? Where do they come from? How can I change the root of them? And how can I build more trust, confidence in my own voice? And when that happened, I can say honestly that my podcast changed drastically. My speaking changed drastically, because I call it outspoken, because I love that word, but I became outspoken in trusting my own message. So I think you've got to allow yourself to fail more times than you could ever imagine, and more times than any business social media guru is going to tell you about, way more times. And then probably right when you're really close to quitting is when you're going to have your breakthrough. And that's when you just decide to keep going.
I couldn't agree more. I think that you bring up a really good point. A lot of people on social media, a lot of business coaches, a lot of content coaches, sales coaches, it doesn't matter who it is, they really don't talk about the amount of times you are going to fail.
Yeah.
And they really don't talk about how difficult it's going to be. A lot of the people who I know I was involved with for a really long time were always talking about how they got fired at the beginning of the pandemic because of the pandemic. And then within 6 months, they were making six figures online. They just talk about the highlight reel. They only talk about the success. And I definitely think that people are starting to get very suspicious is a good word, because so many times they've tried to get into something, whether it's, physical products, e-commerce, digital products, coaching programs, courses, and they have this shiny object syndrome, but because they are not actually taught how to fail and to more or less just kind of pick yourself up and then learn from it and keep going, it's like, I think it's doing a lot of people who are online or who want to be online more of a disservice
Mm.
by not talking about it. So I wanna thank you for bringing that up because it's really important to shed light on that. I actually think I did an episode on that, I think maybe a couple weeks ago, but failure really is probably one of life's best teachers because they're like, what are you gonna do? You know, like you have no other option but to pick yourself back up. So that is really awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And
You're welcome.
also, you started talking about your podcast. I actually wanna dig a little bit more into your podcast because like I said, I listened to it back in 2020. I think I was actually you have 2 podcasts now, correct?
I do. You were a guest on Own Your Choices, Own Your Life, probably early 2021, if I had to guess. Maybe
Yeah.
2 years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, and like I said, like, I could see just within the 3 years how different it is, and you're at over 600 episodes, which is fucking amazing. Like, talk about consistency, talk about showing up. You've been getting some amazing guests onto your podcast, like, just even bringing up the fact that you, like, really enjoy talking, you really enjoy podcasting. I wanna know a little bit more about how you even started the podcast, when that even happened, where you even thought it would start to go, because I feel like a lot of people are talking about starting a podcast or thinking about starting a podcast, and I don't necessarily know that they know what is actually involved with having a podcast. So, can you shed some light on that for us?
I absolutely can. It's a great question. So podcasting is a long game. It is a long game. Actually, I think business is a long game personally. But it's a long game. And that means that like it started back in 2017. So my solo book published in 2017 in November. Around August, I had been, really sharing a lot of my story online before my book was releasing. And yet, no matter where I went, if we can all think back to like 2017 social media, it was like perfectly curated. Everything matched, the grid was perfect. And there was no part of my life that resembled that. Like I was like the complete antithesis of what you saw online. And I was like, okay, this is just not working. I don't fit in anywhere. And then I went, well, if you want to actually normalize these kinds of stories, then someone else has to talk about them more. And so maybe that's what the podcast can be. And so here I was writing a book that a lot of people thought was a crazy idea. And then I came out and said, I'm going to start a podcast. And everybody's like, what do you know about podcasts? I'm like, nothing, but I have Google and I just recorded on my phone. I literally did. I recorded them on my phone when I started. I let it be messy. And like just recently, I shared one of my very first episodes with no ring light, terrible lighting, sound, whatever. I don't care. That's where it started from. So in the beginning, I just really wanted to find a way to share difficult stories. Now, when I first started my podcast, I remember going on Facebook going, hey, who has a story and who wants to share it? Well, like that was, please don't do that. That was I just got bombarded with everybody who I love dearly, but had nothing to do with what my show was about. Get so clear on what your brand is for your podcast, because in my opinion, like own your choices, own your life. Like that is like the definition of being outspoken and sharing your story. And so I am super careful about the stories that I bring in because I want it to match that brand and what's there. So did I know it was ever going to be what it is now? No, I had no idea. I just knew I wanted to start and I wanted to try it. And when I think of the 2017 version of me, I did this up until my book release. And when my book release, I'm very open in sharing this. I did not know how to receive the exposure it was getting. It actually freaked me out, to be honest. You want people to read your stuff, you want people to know what's happening. But when it got out there, it went 6-time bestseller. I had lots of news covering it. I had people reaching out to me for interviews. And everything in my body was just like, oh my God, no, like, oh my God, this is too much. And I did not know how to receive it. When that happened, I pulled away from the podcast for a little while because I didn't know how to show up. I had to go back and build trust within myself and my own voice again, which is literally what I've been doing the last couple of years. So I just try to be super real with people. And I did that. And then in 2018, I was like, okay, do you want to go back to the podcast? I'm like, I like it. I do like doing it. So I went back to it and I was probably like, 2 to 4 episodes a month, kind of somewhere in there. And then I really started to trust myself to do some solo episodes and like really get into some solo episodes. And by the end of 2018 into 2019, we were doing like 1 to 2 episodes a week. And by the end of 2019, we went right from there to 3 episodes a week. So 2 mini solos, 1 interview. I let it grow when I kept going internally and checking, like, what do you want, Marsha? Do you like it? Because it's work. I don't ever want anyone, like, people message me all the time and say, how long does it take to get paid? Like, can I monetize it? I'm like, you haven't even started. Like, I think I think it's like 20, I think is it 97% quit before episode 21. I just put that into context. 97% quit before episode 21. So I was like, let's just be consistent and see what happens. And that's literally what happened. And then eventually we got to the point where it was like, now we get, like I said, 10 to 20 guest requests a week. I'm saying way more no's than I ever say yeses, which is uncomfortable because I only want to encourage people. And I let it grow. So I think that, it is a part of your business that you can do it yourself. You don't have to pay for it, but there did come a point where I did pay for some extra help with my show to get it out there. You are paying for different platforms, so you are paying for it. And as my husband said to me once, like, isn't it just like marketing your business? Which it is. Like, it really, that's how I treat it. It's marketing business, and it's given me the opportunity to grow my voice and my confidence in my voice with practice. So that's the path that it's taken. And then I've watched it over the last, I would say consistently the last 3 years. And I've really watched, like, it's not just downloads. There's ways that they can track podcasts to see where they sit. So I think right now there's like 3.2 million podcasts that are active. And we went in the last year from like the top 10% to top 5 to top 2 to last week being in the top 1.5%. And it's just like,
awesome.
you should see me scream when it happened. And my husband's like, what does this mean? I'm like, oh my, just celebrate with me. Jeez.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's a process, and it's definitely a process, and it's taken a lot of practice. But I've been saying consistently for the last probably 2 years that there will come a time where this will be one of the core pillars of my business. It will pay to be there. It will be, and I just know it. I know it's going to be. I don't know how, and I don't have to know how. But if I quit, I definitely will never find out how. So it's really staying in that long game and knowing that it's part of it. But I do want to share this piece because people will say, it's easy for you because you're confident in your voice. It's easy for you because you've done 600 episodes. I'm like, none of it's easy. And that's a story you're telling yourself. Like, none of it's easy. None of it is easy. That's a story you're telling yourself to keep you exactly where you are without even starting. And I love you, but that's exactly how I speak and coach. And because you're blocking yourself from what's available. None of it is easy. I stayed consistent because I loved it. I love connecting with people. And that's the only way to get better at it. So even if I can share one more quick thing, about a year ago, I want to get even better at podcasting. How can I get better at podcasting? And I went, well, the one way I could do it is to become actively pursue being a guest. So we just crossed like 630 episodes on my one show. And in the last year, I just looked at the stats. I've done 140 episodes as a guest. So
That's
if you want to, it's a lot, just so anybody, and I mean, it's actually really funny when I spent my whole childhood years being criticized for talking too much and being outspoken. I'm like, it's literally what I do right now. Time. So but it is, if you want to get better at something, I want to put myself in the guest chair and like learn from other people. And I can say wholeheartedly that has made a tremendous difference this past year.
That is so impressive. I think there were so many things that I would love to pick out that you just mentioned. But I think the one that is definitely most important is what you just kind of wrapped up with there, where you kind of still have this student mentality where you're going in and you're like, I'm going to put myself in the chair. And even though I've had this podcast for the better part of 5 years now, I'm going to still learn something by putting myself into the experience that is uncomfortable and is like putting myself out there. I mean, I think about myself, like when I pitched podcasts way, way back, like 2020, 2021. I didn't do it all of 2022 because that's when I had Penelope, but like it's hard because it's basically like, these are my credentials. Do you want to have me on your show? And
No.
like, even going back to what you said, where you're getting like 10 to 20 people who are pitching you a week and you have to say no to a lot of them, like, it's important, yes, for you as the host to say that because it needs to, like you said, match your brand, and it needs to be something that is cohesive and that you stand for. And it's hard because that person might internally take it a different way. So they might take it like, "Oh, well, I'm not good enough," or, maybe I just suck at this, and it's not necessarily because of that. Like, it's because you have a business you are trying to uphold and you are trying to keep a certain reputation around, and those people just aren't a good match. It's not to say that they suck. Like, they're probably really good podcast guests, but, you know,
I love
there's so
that you
many
said,
of them.
no, I know. I love that you said that. I hate doing it. I absolutely hate doing it. I'm being totally real. I do. But I have a system of how I respond to them. And it is like, thank you so much for asking. And like, this is why I'm saying not right now. And these are some of the things that you could do. And it's actually not personal. It's like trying to be as consistent with the story as possible. Um,
Yeah.
and I try and do it in such a loving way because I don't want people to be discouraged. I don't like saying no all the time. I have to, but I don't like saying no
Mhm.
all the time. And I had somebody just recently, like very recently, she pitched herself. And I mean, she was just so sweet. And I so wanted to be able to help her. And she was like, okay, well, I appreciate it. Maybe I guess if you ever want to be a guest on my show, I'm just starting. I'm like, I'll be a guest on your show. She's like, you would do that? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I will. And it was just a time of like, she's like, oh, I was so afraid to ask. I'm like, no, like put yourself out there and do it. So if you're starting a podcast or if you're starting to pitch yourself as a guest, like you have to find a way to be in a space of trusting that it's like this or something better. This is not the right fit. It's not personal. It has nothing to do with me. And you know what? You're still going back to the beginning where you talked about change in the last couple of years. If you want to count that as failures, again, I don't think it's failure, but it's putting yourself in the space of like getting no's. Like you're going to get no's in business. And one of the best things you can do is learn how to make those no's not mean something about you.
Yeah. I think that's really important to just not only talk about, like, you're highlighting it. I think maybe that's a different episode for a different day because there's so many other things I wanna ask you. But it is something that it's not about you. Like, I think of I mean, I'm in a job right now. A lot of the time, what my job comes down to is sales too, and, like, people will call in, and I mean, even not even like me selling to them, they're looking to work with us, right? And people call in and they're like, "Hey, can you take this from us?" And I want to be able to say, "Yes, I can help you out." But at the end of the day, we're only so big of a business. We can only handle so much. And it's not because I don't want to help this person. I obviously do. Otherwise, I wouldn't do my due diligence and talk to, the owners of the business. But we can't we can't take everything because we only have so much space to be able to handle, and we only have so much equipment to be able to process things. So, I mean, whether it's in the online business, doing a lot of storytelling, marketing, or whether it's in obviously the physical reality, like, people say no because of certain circumstances or certain limitations within their circumstances. But another thing that all of that to say, one of the things that actually kind of just like while you were talking about all of this that just kind of like came to me is that you do this NLP certification for your program Outspoken. I don't know that this is what you have done, but when people, like, let's say people say no to you, right? Do you use methods or do you have tactics that you fall onto to help you kind of get over that and be like, it's not about me internally, it's about like something else. And this is what I'm going to do to kind of calm myself down, recollect, and then move forward?
Yes, multiple times a day. I'm just going to say yes. I build a toolbox that I use and access daily, like daily. I can't even stress that one enough. I really can't, because if I can give you a tiny bit, a little bit of a geek stat here, we end up with we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. 80 to 90% of them we had the day before. They're on repeat. They're like just this, it's like my hard drive running on repeat over and over and over. And 90% of those are negative. So like we are literally humans running on a negative groundhog loop every single day, and we are not consciously aware of it. Our conscious mind is like responsible for 1 to 5% of what we think. Our subconscious mind is 95 to 99%. And that subconscious mind was literally, it's like our body. It's not just our brain, but it's our body. It's where our emotions sit, our feelings sit, etc. And most of that was created before we were the age of 7. So we're unfortunately a whole group of adults running around with like a little inner child running the show that is like kicking our ass, and we don't even see it. Like we're trying to fix things, and we're trying to apply strategy, which is your conscious mind. It's the goal setter. It's the goal setter that like makes the beautiful vision board, which is great. It's great. You need to be able to see things in visions and pictures to be able to access it. It's the one that puts a workout plan together in your, like, you need that. But here's the thing. If it does not matter how hard you push for strategy with building and creating a goal and bringing it to life, if subconsciously you don't believe it's possible. If you don't believe it's possible, you cannot outmuscle it. So no, I'm using those tools constantly. So even right down to this space that your thoughts are only ever, they only do one of two things. They replay the past or they create the future. That's it. That's it. So when you catch yourself in a loop of like, oh my God, this happened, this, yep, that's the past. You're like, you're creating the groundhog loop. You're doing that. It takes work and it takes practice. Where I resisted in the online space, like even back 10 years ago, without really understanding what NLP was, people would say your affirmations and write your gratitudes. Okay. Well, I was living in a shit show. I didn't have any affirmations and gratitudes because we were living in a like absolute gong show. So I couldn't even that didn't sit authentically with me, and I didn't understand it. So I started to get really curious about what are the power of the words that I'm saying? What am I doing? Like, what do they mean? And I felt stuck constantly because it's the only word I ever said. So of course that's what I felt. So I really started to understand some of those things. But when it comes down to it, it's like when you can look at the words that you're saying and what you're thinking, you have a lot more control over your environment than you think that you do. This is not saying you have to sit and manifest good thoughts. It's not it at all. But they're important. When you are thinking a good thought, or you're assuming that like this happened, this person said no. Maybe they said no because it's really not the right fit for me. Maybe they said no because this is actually not the right show for me. Like maybe I shouldn't be on this. Maybe they said no because there's something better that's coming next. Like on the back of my board there, I have a little quote card that I say, and it's like this or something better. So if this didn't work, that's because something better is coming. And that's the energy that I choose to take. And when I take that energy, then I show up differently. So and I show up differently, my intention's different, my actions are different, like all of it changes. It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. But the other thing I want to say about this is that with NLP and some of the tools that we have techniques where we're able to go into our subconscious mind and go to the root of some of those stories. So instead of just painting a very positive affirmation on top of a really shitty mindset, which is still a shitty mindset, you are able to go back to where are the roots of those stories? What do they mean? What have I made them mean? And how can I change that to new empowering belief? And that is some of the things that I've done. And you know what? I can just say with certainty so many times when something has happened that I'm like, God, I was kind of banking on that. And I thought that might be the one thing that turns out. And I stop and think, okay, if it's this or something better, what if there's something else that I am meant to be following and to be doing and to be open for, right? Then all of a sudden I get like a random message from somebody I haven't talked to in 3 years who was like, oh, I really want to learn about that program. Can you tell me about that? And I'm like, okay, where'd that come from? Like that stuff is happening all the time. And I do believe that as much as we are responding to the world around us, I do believe the world around us is responding to us. And I think we get to control how we show up, and that can affect and change the world around us too.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so funny that you say that because I think I was recording. I can't remember if it was a YouTube video or if it was a podcast, mostly because like my life has just been a blur for the last 3 weeks. And I'm like, okay, what am I even doing? But I did record something the other day and I was talking about how we're basically like radio towers. Like Nikola Tesla was not wrong, where he was like, we are emitting a frequency and it's with our brain and it'll bring back everything to us that it is that we're emitting the frequency of. So it's funny that you say that because I literally just said that. I want to say it was a YouTube video when I was recording it the other day because it's true. Like whatever mindset, perspective, whatever you want to call it, whatever more or less like emotion we are in is what is radiating out of us, and that is going to be what returns back to us. And it's just, I don't know, it was just everything you said was so funny because you were like, we're just basically little, I just thought of Penelope, I was like little toddlers running around with like absolutely no boundaries and like how we respond to things. And it's hard, it's funny because like in my mind I'm thinking of Penelope, running around, but at the same time it's like really what it is how are you parenting yourself through all of these things with what tools you've learned from your childhood all the way through to your adulthood to be able to be like, okay, this is not about me. It's just about the circumstances of the situation. And I can easily move on by taking a second to understand that for myself. So it's just so many of the things that you just mentioned there were just so funny. I couldn't help but note, like, reference that because it was just hilarious. Like, I mean, think about it, a little toddler running around in
We
like
are. It
the
actually
real
makes
world, but in an adult body.
when you look at some people, you're like, I see the toddler's running the show. I see it. Like I can see it. And I don't say that in judgment. I'm just saying we can see it. We have so much unhealed, unprocessed trauma within inside of us. And I don't know, I cannot remember the quote, but like if you don't heal like what's inside of you, you'll bleed all over everyone else. And you will. And you will. And
Yeah.
that also is
Yeah.
bleeding over the potential opportunities that can come your way too, right? Because I often think like, what's to say the universe doesn't show up at your front door with like exactly what you want, exactly what you say you want. And you're holding on to so much anger, resentment, things that don't serve you. And the universe is like, you said you wanted this. And you're like, but my hands are full. I don't have any space for any of that. And the universe is like, then put it down. Like, stop carrying things that you don't need to carry. And I think that then affects your energy. So, really, in a nutshell, one of the very simple things, it's simple, not easy. If I take it back to the title of my podcast, Own Your Choices, Own Your Life, how much time and energy are you spending owning things that are not yours so that you don't have the energy left to own what you can? And when you are in a space of like all that anger, resentment, frustration, the negative thoughts are not serving you, you don't have anything left to move forward. And you don't even see that there's another way to do it. So when I feel the most frustrated, and like I literally had something happen this morning, and I could feel this old version of me was like, like just wanted to come through my skin. And I was like, okay, that's data, right? Everything is data. It doesn't have to mean something about me. It's data. Data is there. All right. Now, what can I control about that? Well, that's done. It already happened, right? It's already gone. So what can I do? I can control how I respond. And that really comes down to like, what do I need? What tools do I back into? How can I do that? And I can't tell you, like, I really think it can be that simple. What can I control? What can I choose? What are my choices? How can I make a different decision moving forward and focus forward? We learn from our past. We just don't have to live there, right?
Yeah.
We do learn from it, but
Mhm.
how can I do something different moving forward?
Yeah. What an incredibly powerful thing to say. I mean, this is even bringing me to the whole like this past season I was coaching crew and there were these kids who literally the last race this season, like for the first 4 or 5 races, they're 5 for 5. Okay. Gold medals, 5 races, first 5 races. Last 2 races, everything fell apart and they started pointing the finger at each other. And whether it's pointing the finger at another person or like really taking the time to realize that you actually should be pointing the finger at yourself. Like it is such an incredibly powerful thing to just like you even mentioned, just own your choices because that is literally what you chose to do. And instead of pointing at somebody else and like whether it's a coach or whether it's a teammate or whether it's yourself, like take the time and be like, okay, I chose to do this. I chose to go about it this way, and I have to take responsibility for it. And this is how we have to move forward because I don't want to do it that way again. So, what an incredibly powerful thing to mention and to say, Marsha. I want to ask you what's going on in your world. Where can people find you? How can people get in touch with you? Because I'm sure that you're going to be pretty new to some of the listeners here on this podcast.
Thank you. My name is very long, right? Vanwynsberghe is long. So everything in social media is Marsha Van W. Literally everything is Marsha Van W. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, now that I've had to start over again completely from scratch because it was gone overnight. Thank you, world. And so it's there, but that's my website as well. And you'll find me right now building out, I've got the podcast, I have Outspoken, the coaching certification that kicks off again in January for the second round. And then I'm also over here we're about halfway through Write Your Damn Book Mastermind, where I support authors on how to share a vulnerable story, like how to come to a space of finding your voice and share it. And then now we're also publishing books. So I've got some people coming into my world going, I want to learn how to become outspoken, write the damn book, and publish it. And it's like, that was interesting. None of that existed a year ago. Like, it's like, this is where you have to just be open. But those are a lot of the things that I get to do. Those are my main two containers where I support people. And I support some people in a one-on-one capacity, but not too often. And I'm a big believer, and I just want to share this as a permission. When I said earlier, keep checking in with the things that you love in your business and make sure it's the things that you love doing, and say yes to the experiences, the people, the connections that expand you. And at the same time, honor what doesn't. Because I probably said no to 4 or 5 people this year for like one-on-one coaching that I knew I wasn't the best fit for them. And I knew that they were not the best fit for me. And I think that we have to learn how to honor our energy because it's the only resource we have. And I think that when you chase things for the wrong reasons, money can become toxic. And I don't want that. I want to be like working in the best energy and space that I can. So I just want to share that because I kind of think it went in line with what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think it's really important to share that because a lot of people make it seem like it's for the money, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily what it's really all about. And if I feel like there will be a point in time where if that is the only thing you're going after, the money, then you are going to be sorely disappointed when you find what's at the end of the road because there's not gonna like, the money's not gonna be there. Like, it's not the support that you are really actually looking for.
No,
So,
it won't. It
yeah.
won't give you think it will. And I think there's enough people who've talked about fulfillment, and Tony Robbins does a great job with it. There's a lot of people who chase success their entire life, found it by all standards, and were miserable and ended up ending their own life. They were just not in a space like, so be really mindful what you're chasing and learn how to listen to what your body, your subconscious mind, your thoughts, like what you really want, like what's important to you, because I cannot stress that enough. And I think when you can get to that space, you know that what's coming for you is coming for you. It's meant for you. Like you cannot miss something that is meant for you if you're open
Yeah.
and ready. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the universe will absolutely deliver it. You just have to, like you said, be open and ready to be willing to receive it. That's the other thing. That I also think that's a different episode for a different day. Like the whole reception of things, because
But
people do receive things. But anyways, Marsha, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today and for sharing so much valuable information. We are going to talk to y'all soon. Thanks for tuning in.